Resident Evil Village is now available on the PlayStation 5, 4, Xbox, and PC. And this is a game that I was very much looking forward to. I just replayed Biohazard the other day in preparation for this, just to revisit the world, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. I had some issues with Biohazard. I'll get into that a little later because I do want to talk about it in correlation to Village. But it was a game that ended with a very interesting setup to Village, and one that I had no idea where it could go. And having seen nothing about Village, having only the vaguest of ideas on what could happen, I went into this game pretty excited. But before we do continue, I should say that there are going to be some spoilers in this review. You have been warned. It's kind of hard to talk about this game without not mentioning some plot details that happen very early on in the game that really set the stage for what happens next. After the events of Biohazard, Ethan and Mia Winters are living happily and peacefully. They have a new baby named Rose, and things seem to be going better than ever. Then, out of nowhere, Chris Redfield shoots Mia down and takes Rose, and Ethan has no idea why this is happening. Eventually, Ethan ends up in a village for reasons he cannot quite fathom, and he has to fight his way through it in order to apparently find his daughter, who seems to be in the hands of some very shady characters that seem to be wanting the baby for some reasons that seem pretty devious. And it has a slew of interesting villains to offer in this game, including one Lady Dimitrescu, who is the internet's new crush. Resident Evil Biohazard went back more to the horror roots of the franchise. It was more dark and more sinister, and it definitely leaned into that as much as possible. Village does two things. It does that, it maintains that tone. It is a very dark game, and it does some very dark things along the way. But it also maintains a lot of the shoot 'em up aspects that the games have become famous for. And it has some very fun gameplay to offer on that front, which is one of the positives I'll say about this game. It is a much more fluid game than Resident Evil 7. It's a lot better, and they definitely took some of the complaints a lot of people had to heart, and they doubled down on making some improvements. So that's very good. One of the biggest issues was Ethan's running. Sometimes I look into comment sections and seeing what people have to say about it, but he was very slow in Biohazard. And even if it's not the fact that he's not fully trained yet or he's not very good with weapons, it's just very clunky to move around sometimes, especially in situations where you needed him to be a lot faster. Biohazard did that, so Village obviously took that to heart, and he's a lot more agile in this game. That's for damn sure. And he's a lot more reformed now. So the last couple of years he's been training, and you can tell because he's much better with weapons. The reload time is a lot faster, and the aim is better. That was another issue last time. It was a lot more unstable, and you wasted a lot of bullets. You waste some bullets here too, but definitely lesser, and there is a better precise sort of handling to the weapons on display. That also might have to do with the fact that unless maybe with Biohazard they were trying to go for some sense of realness, where when you're using a gun for the first time it's very heavy, and so it's not like you can focus in all your shots at once. But as the game goes along, it gets better. One thing that Village also gets a huge bump in is visuals. This is a stunning game from start to finish. Some gorgeous, gorgeous visuals, some gorgeous character designs, and some really gorgeous environments. Some of the detail in this game is off the charts. And since this is a much larger world than what Biohazard had created, and I know I keep going back just to that game, I could be talking about all the Resident Evil games, but the reason I go back is because this one's pretty much a direct sequel to it. So it made the most sense to compare it or to talk about it in contrast to that game more than any other game in the franchise. But this one has some very interesting subtle details and does a lot more in terms of puzzle spaces and in terms of creepy visuals than Biohazard. I do think this has less gross visuals than Biohazard, but there's definitely a lot to be explored in this game. You can go on for hours and hours. If you want to speed run this thing, which I sort of did, you can finish the game in about 10 hours. In fact, I finished the game in 10 hours and 1 minute, which is crazy because I actually wasn't anticipating to do that, and then it just happened. But I finished pretty much most of the game. I mean, I guess there's some trophies that's still left to collect, but I pretty much explored everything that I could explore. I really enjoyed my time doing that. I really enjoyed playing as Ethan Winters too, and he's a character that really grew on me ever since 7, and he's really good here. And you definitely are on his side, on his, crusade And you're definitely on his side, on his crusade, trying to make sure that you can get to Rose as soon as possible before anything bad happens to her. And the stuff that you go through is intense. And what I have to talk about is his hands. Because this man's hands are the, I don't know, man. Like this poor dude. Why? What is it with his hands? In the first one, he gets cut off and it gets and then sewed back on, and then in this game,
Shit! Like I'd let you get away. You'll be sliced to ribbons before you ever see your child.
speaking of those villains, let's talk about them, shall we? They're all very charismatic and they're all very unique. You remember each and every one of them for different reasons. There's this one little doll who's very, very creepy and has easily the creepiest level in the entire game, involving a puzzle room with a doll, another one. And that was absolutely brilliant. That level was unreal insanity, but it was very, very tense, and it was maybe the best segment of the game for me. There is, of course, Lady Dimitrescu, who is, yes, the internet's new crush, but she's a terrifying woman, and she does some pretty crazy stuff. But like I said in the beginning of my review, this goes back to a lot of the shoot 'em up aspects of the other Resident Evil games too. And so there are moments where it gets over the top, it does some cheesy stuff, a lot more than 7 did. And that can be somewhat of a detriment, because that leads me to maybe my only negative in this entire game. That aside from a couple of moments which are more nerve-wracking and, anxiety-inducing, there was nothing as scary as 7 was. 7 was constantly unnerving from start to finish. This one has unnerving moments very early on in the game, but some of them sort of dissipate as it goes on because it gets more shoot 'em up and much more exciting, especially when you're heading towards the ending, which is just basically one big giant action sequence, and it's awesome. I had a ball with that finale, and it was really great. But everything leading up to that at points can feel a little less on the side of horror that a lot of fans of the franchise were probably expecting. Now, that might not be the case for everybody. It was just a very minor issue that I noticed. I just found myself feeling a little less unnerved this time, except for that one bit with the dolls. There's also some bits with a guy named Heisenberg, who is considered the most dangerous villain because he is the one who knocks. And there's also a fish monster villain. That's where I remember thinking, oh yeah, this is a lot lighter than 7, right, because of the fish monster thing. But make no mistake, just because I'm constantly making parallels to 7 doesn't mean that I want to necessarily keep comparing the game to 7. I want to look at the game on its own accord. And on its own accord, Village is great. I really enjoyed my time playing this game, and I'm looking forward to playing it again. There's a lot more to explore in it, and there's a lot more to do even after you've played the first time. There's so much more you can do. There's so many more things you can discover. There's so many more interactions that you can have. I also forgot to mention Duke is a character in this who constantly helps you. He's a merchant, and he will constantly sell you some stuff if you sell him some stuff, and you make some money along the way. That was pretty cool. I had some fun with that. That was pretty great. Something I also want to talk about is weapons, because one of the issues that I had in terms of 7 was that there were points where I was trying to access something, and sometimes it would be very, very slow, and you'd be in the middle of something and you really, really need a weapon. This one, a lot faster. I really like the way you can also customize it in a way that you can sort of arrange everything by priority, which is also really, really good. And that really helped in some situations, particularly, like I said, towards the end. It really helps when you're fighting the ultimate villain, who is Mother Miranda. You definitely need to know where your weapons are, because you basically have to go up against her with everything you've got. And the result is highly satisfying, and I had a great time with that. Now, I know I said some spoilers in this review, but I'm not really going to go into that much, because most of the big reveals in terms of story happen towards the very end, and I don't want to give too much away, just in case you've again not played it yet. I'm going to keep it about as much as I can towards the end, and then I'm going to sort of, take a step back, and this is where I take a step back. You guys should experience the game for yourself. As far as the villains go, you do get some pretty cool stuff too in terms of how to take each and every one of them down, whether it be through shattering a window or something like that, because some of them hate light, because they're basically vampires, to something like a mechanized transformer devastator-like thing, which was awesome, easily the most satisfying grin you had throughout the entire time of playing this game, which is what I was talking about, right? It got a little goofy there, but it's kind of goofy that I liked. That flaw of mine isn't that much of an issue for me. Overall, I really loved Village. This is actually one of my favorite games in the Resident Evil series. I thought it was fantastic. And I'm looking forward to seeing where they go next, if they do decide to continue the story. But it'll obviously be a very different story based on how this one ends. And so, I don't know. The possibilities at this point in time are endless. I'm going to give Resident Evil Village a 9 out of 10. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And happy gaming!